G'day legends, happy Wednesday. I hope that you are having a fantastic day and so far a fantastic midweek. Now legends, of course, as always, we do have a lot to go over and a lot of nuance to add. So right in the beginning, we're going to be talking about drones and drones being picked up, FPV drones, much further away than typically their 10-kilometre range. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that because I've actually seen across Twitter and Reddit and Telegram people quoting something I spoke about the other day from myself when I had a contact who'd worked in the Russian space around drones hand me some information about potentially longer range FPVs. So we're going to look at that a little bit more in depth, some counter drone, and also what this would mean, because we do know that Ukraine doesn't have the manpower advantage or the artillery advantage, but for a lot of the war has held at least on par or slightly above on drones, and how important that is for the Russian forces to try and draw back any of that, and what may that then look like. Then we're going to talk about the informational space and how that is just skewing things, and how people, I think, just have some really ridiculous visions, and how a lot of this opinion and outward anger is not based on love for the Ukrainian people or wanting the best outcome for the Ukrainian people. It's based on hate of the Russians using then whoever is fighting them as the expense. And that's just not people as basement dwellers on Twitter. I think that goes all the way through to a lot of politicians making decisions as well. We're going to then talk about politics, diplomacy a little bit there. We need to talk about infantry, light tactics of using lighter vehicles. As you know, I've been pushing back against everyone who says motorcycles are ridiculous. Well, then if motorcycles are ridiculous to use in war, then I'm sorry, but every professional Western Special Forces unit then must be idiots because they've been used for a long time. And now we see Ukraine adopting assault motorbike tactics. What a shock. And we'll also look at a very large strike that has happened, which I do think is avoidable. And then, of course, we'll look at the maps and where Russia is said to be making the first real strategically important large-scale movements on the maps and what may become of that. So, of course, as always, lads, a lot to go over. So we're seeing a lot like this. Now, I believe on this account here from Mr. Roman Donic, I believe this is where a lot has come from, but we're seeing this reported through multiple different channels and media as well, that an FPV drone with an RPG was over Kharkiv, which is a long way from the line of control. Whether it is advisable to transfer actions to the enemy territory, the city was once bought at the same time at a very high price. Of course, that pushed back in the late of 2022. So what I'm getting at is a larger range FPV style drone. So let's go to Kharkiv and see where the closest Russian forces actually are. So let's just go from the center of Kharkiv to back here. We're talking 30 kilometers, but realistically, these guys are going to be operating a few Ks from here. So you're talking 35, 40 kilometers, a long way out of the typical range of these. And what we went over the other day is what I'd been handed across of a fiber optic mothership drone to get then behind the line that lands, and the radio control on that works to then use RF drones behind the line because it's well past then the electronic warfare. And this is exactly what I showed. And if you'd like to screenshot this and use it, please go for your life. Now, again, I had to change some of this to protect identification, and some of this I didn't think much of at the time in our discussion back and forward. But changed slightly, but it maintains the original then message, was we had proposed alternative solutions, like a larger drone connected via fiber optics that could carry and drop 4 FPVs, land safely, and act as a repeater to strike deeper behind enemy lines. So what a lot of then drone makers are looking to do is have a drone in the air work as that repeater and repeat down. We see the IDF doing this a lot. Of course, Ukraine and Russia have done similar before, but not flying. This actually then landing. It's tethered by that fiber optic umbilical that can transfer a lot of information across that, and of course is impervious to electronic warfare, and then it's using RF from there going out. He says to penetrate behind enemy lines. We even demonstrated a safe concept since losing the bigger drones would have been a major setback. They seemed interested at the time. Now, we see in the very last line here, it says Ukraine's heavy reliance on drones is also its biggest vulnerability. If that system fails, and I believe that it likely will, that will be the collapse of the line. And Ukraine does have a massive reliance on drones, from ISR to FPV to all different sorts between as well. There is a huge reliance on that. And absolutely, the Russians will be trying to push number one on trying to counter that. Okay, so not all your eggs in one basket. This is why I've said there's been too much focus on high-tech weapons and not just mass of systems as well. So we then see what this may be. So this is contradictory to what I had seen as well. So some are saying that no, there's a compact version of the Garan Shahid drone known as a tumour Vic, and that this is a much smaller but longer range, almost FPV style, that then is launched off like this chute thing here. You can sort of see it sitting on it. That the range is 30k, so it sits in the range, 25 minutes in the air, maximum speed of 180 off that catapult. That's what I was looking for. I used the word chute. So again, still going to be, as I'm seeing it, could be affected by electronic warfare, of course, with terrain mapping and other bits and pieces. Yes, it can get around that, as well as optical targeting, like how a javelin works, but still, are we seeing something there? And I'm seeing a lot of pages going, hey, this report that we're seeing here, Willie OAM said the other day something about that. And in this last line here about the reliance being the biggest vulnerability here on really a singular system, we see a lot of anti-drone systems entering the battlefield. And this is one I've seen over the past couple of days, this Yolka. And this is what the Russians are then trialing, at least on the battlefield. I hadn't seen it in mass, but now I've seen a few videos of it. And we can see when he holds it up here, we get a better idea of it. And I've sent it across to a couple of contacts that work in drone industries and just said, hey, is there any more information you can give me on this? I'm waiting back on that, so we can see then at least two props here. I'm guessing because it's like a star here, it's going to have 4 propellers as well as very large canards on the front. So it'll be able to turn very, very quickly. That's a very large wing with control surfaces for the size of this. And what I am unsure on, we see this being launched here. You can see it like beeping. That's sort of how like a Stinger works. And then in the end, we do see that it does take down then an FPV looking drone here. What I am unsure on is, does this have an explosive warhead that explodes and takes it out with shrapnel, much like an air-to-air missile, or does it knock it out of the air like we have seen Ukrainian FPV drones doing to a number of larger drones that the Russians are using for ISR? But we will see. But I do agree with this bottom line here, is Ukraine does have a heavy reliance on drones. So there'll be a lot of Russian effort put into countering those. And Russia is at the moment in front of that FPV optic space, because we do see a fiber optic space. We do see even a article from Kiev Independent today saying Ukraine's trying to catch up on that. And just from the videos alone, we do see that Russia is operating significantly more fiber optic controlled drones on the front line, of course, impervious to that electronic warfare. So let's look at information space, politics, what Zelensky has said after a phone call with Mr. Trump. Now, AMK mapping, he has said this, and I think there's some interesting bits we can talk about in this. One of my predictions was the informational space is going to get far, far more nasty over this year. I guarantee you, there are some pro-Ukrainians out there who, if they visited some city in eastern Ukraine, talked to the actual Ukrainians and got told by said Ukrainians that they want the war to end, they would then proceed to call those same Ukrainians Russian trolls and Kremlin agents. The bar for being that is set at absolutely zero. Any sort of differing opinion from what is then the allowed opinion, you are instantly that. We'll go over this more. This war is a perfect example of how people can form opinions like this from the comfort of sitting in their own homes on their cell phone, while real Ukrainians and Russians are suffering the stupid war that could end if Zelensky actually negotiated in good faith. So, example of people forming opinions on their phone, arguing this. And what I've said is, we know Ukraine has manpower problems, guys getting ripped off the street, that it could definitely change the front line. But none of these people are actually willing to go and sign up also. We do see a lot of this in the informational space, of this aggressive hate, threats, all of this. We're going to go over it. Now, this war does not have to be fought. And those calling on the West to provide Ukraine with tens of billions of dollars worth of weapons are so misinformed and lack common sense. Why should weapons be sent to Ukraine if all it's going to do is prolong the inevitable? Let's say Ukraine does get $100 billion worth of weapons. What happens next? 20,000 more Russian soldiers die. The war carries on for 6 months longer than it otherwise would have. I don't understand the logic. Posts like this above are incredibly disrespectful of Ukrainians, including Ukrainian soldiers who actually claim to support, and downplays the suffering that they endure. It's easy for people to say stuff like this from the comfort of their own homes while others fight the war. And what this was in response to is Mr. Clement Molan, who I've spoken about as well, does a fantastic job on analysis and his mapping of fortifications. People are going, this is just Russian nonsense. We're actually going to look over what he posted a bit later, Mr. Molan, because I believe it's very, very good of his analysis of frontline movements. He made no ideological or bias in that. He's literally drawing on a map of this is where I think the Russians will move. But what I think Mr. AMK Mapping is getting at here is something that you and I on this channel have spoken about for many, many months. Now, someone like myself, I've spent months and months, several months or more in Ukraine. I've conducted frontline aid, putting myself in danger in multiple different areas, from driving people living in frontline areas to their chemotherapy, to delivering firefighters, rescue equipment, and everything in between. But because I like to think I have a more realistic view of this, an actual analysis, not just propaganda, I'm of all the above slurs that you'd like to make. And you do this to then just discredit any argument. And the reason I have this is I want the best for Ukrainians, not exclusively what's worse for the Russians. Now, online bots, people online, many European leaders, they do not operate out of the love for Ukrainians, wanting the most prosperous opportunities for Ukraine and the best possible outcome for Ukrainians. No, they're not operating on that. They're operating on hate of the Russians and what is the worst outcome possible for the Russians, regardless of the costs that it may then incur onto the people that I so passionately say that I support. And I say again and again, the longer this war goes on, it's good, because the more Russians will die. That's not really how traditional warfare works. Yeah, more Russians will die. It's not just that either. The longer this war goes on, the less and less likely Ukraine is to actually recover, given demographic issues and given the territory that is being recovered, and probably worse deals on the table. And these people, at least on the whole, are most likely saying this while being not prepared to fight. And they then are using Ukraine and Ukraine's future as a tool of their fate. Not their fate, their hate. They're using that as a tool for their own hate of Russians, that it wouldn't matter, I don't think, any country that was fighting against then Russia. It's not for love of the country. It's for hate of the other side, even if that means sailing them down a road of no recovery. And Mr. AMK, he talks in this about that the war could end with the requests here. And a part of me that has concern here is this deal is likely going to expire at some point and may end up significantly worse. Russia is requesting around the same as what happened in Istanbul 22. But if we start seeing things move and deteriorate further, well, it may end up worse. That at the end of the day, I want the best for the people here and the most prosperous future, not have a Pyrrhic victory, pay war for 5 more years, have a worse outcome. Any victories are Pyrrhic, and the country collapse due to demographics, emigration, and it's in a state that the EU will never let them in, NATO won't. I just put myself as an actual realist. And I remember I've got it written on my desk because someone commented it one day and said, Willie has gone from a pro-Ukrainian idealist to a pro-Ukrainian realist. And I believe in people's right to self-determination. But at the end of the day, the sword throughout history has then determined a lot of outcomes. I'm not saying that is fair, but if you look into real politics versus just these ideological, idealist, ethics or morals-based politics, it just doesn't make sense to me, because I go, well, yeah, but they feel that way on the same line. As passionately as Karen Callas or Ursula von der continue lying, as passionate as they are, that you have, then the Kremlin is passionate that they are correct as well. So trying to then impose from a sense of morals, it's not going to work. You're going to have to win by the stick at that point. or have a deal with a carrot to maintain your stick at some degree. And we then see Ursula von der continue lying, say this: I got off the phone with Zelensky. We're coordinating closely the next steps that were adopted, the 17th package of sanctions. The US is actually not behind this. Mrs. Karen said that they were. I don't believe the US is. An 18th package is being prepared. It is time to intensify the pressure on Russia and bring about the ceasefires. Of course, Russia then, they want Russia to come begging for the ceasefire, which we know is begging for a ceasefire at this point in time. And of course, you want Russia to come wanting a ceasefire, so you're in a position of power. It works both fucking ways. But this is the 17th time that you've assured us of this. My forbidden question is, what happens if it doesn't? What then? What is your plan? Or does the war just continue on? And the longer the attritional war like this, with post-war attrition as well included, then the less likely Ukraine is to actually to ever recover without the people there having a say on whether it does or does not then continue. And if they have a say and they want to continue it, I'm fully behind that choice as well, but it's not on the table. And what I see with a lot of this is to try and check Russia's power due to then historical hate of Russians as well, and they are willing to check and reduce Russia's power. They are prepared to sacrifice a lot of Ukraine's future for this. And I see with AMK's getting to in this as well, that that's what it is a lot of people are not basing it on the love of Ukraine. They're basing it on the hate of Russia. And if that means posting this flag in your bio, it means that. But it's not actually that, if that makes sense, because otherwise you'd go and fight or you'd go and volunteer or actually do something rather than just tweet about how much you hate Russians and videos of young Russian guys dying on the front line. Now, Volodymyr Zelensky, he had a phone call with Trump, of course, following Trump's phone call with Vladimir Putin, reaffirmed to President Trump a full and unconditional ceasefire and not to dilute this proposal, that pressure on Russia, this will push it towards real peace. This is obvious, what everyone around the world should be doing. Apparently it's obvious to everyone. But what I'll say, Zelensky, is your unconditional 30-day ceasefire, it has been rejected. It's a no. So you've got two options in this. You've either got more pressure, which is by sanctions, because sadly no country is actually willing to really do any more than that, or you've got dilution. Trump's not buying it, in my opinion. Now, he talks about, we've discussed next steps, and objective assessment of each side's proposals need to be made. So there needs to be an assessment of where Ukraine is and where Russia is. But that needs to be balanced against the frontline situation as well. And every proposal at the table deserves an honest evaluation. This is good, because that is what it needs, but you can't just then throw it out if it doesn't fit with you either. It's crucial for us that the United States does not distance itself from the talks, because the only one that benefits is Putin, which I do agree with. It does benefit Putin if the US does distance itself. But if you don't want the US to distance yourself, then Ukraine has to show that they are willing to work with the US on realistic circumstances as well. And if none of this can be diluted and you're not willing to move on that at all, and you don't have the pressure to form it the other way, well, then the US is going to go, are you willing to work with us? And we talk again about then further sanctions. And the US, they're not wanting further sanctions, because they are going, if we are trying to find a peace and we're also just pushing sanctions down your throat, then they're going to stop working with us as well. And Zelensky and other European leaders today and every day, they accuse Putin of extending the war. And I agree with them. Putin is extending the war. Why? Because strategically it is in his favour to extend the war. And you know why they are saying this? Because they know that also. Because Putin and his team, they assess that it's in their favour. And on the reverse, the reason all the European leaders and Zelensky are calling this out is because they assess that it's not in their favour to further extend the war. Okay? But this is where there's a bit of fog in this. So it should concern you, it should concern everyone, that the side that you were saying that we are sanctioning and that these sanctions are going to kick in and have further pressure, the side which is being sanctioned is also the side who is looking to extend the war. It should very, very much be the opposite of this, as sanctions then hit harder and harder as time flows on. The side sanctioned, if they were really, really working, would be looking to shorten the war and throw everything at it quickly, rather than going, yeah, we're happily to fight for another 5 years or more. There's a lot of contradiction in this as well. And that's what if you were to ask me about so much of this, it's just, things just don't add up on the most simple Occam's razor theory of so much. Now, in then the Sumy Oblast, about 35 to 40 kilometers from the front line, we do see a Russian drone here observing many Ukrainian forces here from the 1st Separate Special Purpose Brigade, and then we see a zoom out, so we can't get a good battle damage assessment, but a Russian Iskander missile then goes over this, and Russia claim at least that there was 70 CAS. Again, any numbers, massive grain of salt. But what I will say is it's far too much of a common issue at this point in the war, at 3.5 years in this fucking war, to have large groups of soldiers, 40 Ks or less from the front line, with a completely ISR saturated sky. We see the Russians do this, we see the Ukrainians do this, and the command should know you cannot have groupings like this, because if you are seen, it could be then absolutely catastrophic. Now, let's talk about infantry. As we reported a lot of this late last year, earlier this year, and Rob Lee reports Ukrainska Pravda, so Ukrainian media, amidst ongoing command issues and corruption allegations, the 155 Mech has recorded more than 1,200 cases of AWOL desertion since the beginning of 2025. So 1,200 cases since 25. That said, 1,200 reported cases, and I believe it's only reported on the second AWOL. Correct me if I'm incorrect on this. But the main causes is transferring soldiers from a different service. So they're in something like, they could be a cook, they could be a transportee, they could work in the Air Force, and those guys are being transferred to the infantry, and also a lack of support, including then drones. So this is something we went over a lot, and if this desertion AWOL isn't then really nipped in the butt, it will get worse. But at least these guys were there. Of course, you've got guys who have deserted and ended up in Switzerland making millions. But the transfer to infantry, this displays that there is little interest for soldiers to volunteer to actually be in the infantry. They transfer there, they want to get out. But what that means to me as well is because they're having to transfer them, you're not having guys volunteer to be in the infantry either. I am a former infantryman. I understand, because it is the most dangerous, the most hard, and the most demanding job in the entire military. The reason people are attracted to it as well is because no kid, when they're playing toy soldiers, plays a truck driver. They play infantry. But of course, it is the hardest, it is the most dangerous as well. So what they're having to do is get people into the military and then transfer them across, because they're not volunteering to do that. And there is this idea, and this idea is more around the pro-Ukrainian channels that I see, that this war will be run by drones and technology. People thought the same when crossbows entered the battlefield, when catapults entered the battlefield, when tanks entered the battlefield, when planes entered the battlefield, and this is simply untrue. All of these are force multiplications. These are force multipliers for the infantry, but war has always and will always be won or lost by the infantry. Drones, fantastic for movements on the battlefield. ATGM, planes, all of this. But at the end of the day, the ones that win or lose a land war is the infantry, and that is the most important thing to have, with high morale, a good outlook of the war, good training, all of that as well. And in infantry, what will take the highest losses, a lot of people as well. But also, if you're only throwing guys who don't want to be there or dragging them off the street, that's not going to be good either. And you see the diggers in World War I talking about this, that we don't want then guys who are conscripted here because they won't be motivated to fight. Now, talking more about light infantry, we see this being shared from the 425th Scala Brigade of the 1st Assault Motorcycle Company of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. What a fucking shock. Something that is a legitimately good idea that many units have been using now for years comes into play in a battlefield where if you've got 10 guys in one vehicle and it takes one drone to take that out, you've got 10 guys on 10 bikes that a drone can only take one out. It makes sense. They're much faster. They can go across much more difficult terrain, much lighter for things like mines, all of that. Ride a motorcycle through a paddock compared to a vehicle. And this is something we've seen everyone call out as the most stupid orc tactic ever. Same with the cope cages, same with the Bliat barns, same with multiple other bits and pieces that then we see getting adopted. And Deep State has somewhat talked about this, but through a very rosy lens. At the same time, assault operations on motorcycles are actively carried out by the Russians, and opinions differ here. It is no secret that such cases of use were mostly ridiculed and considered ineffective at first glance, because almost all attempts by the enemy to such assaults were multiplied by 0. That is incorrect. Multiple times we have seen the original break-in before then the armoured forces as well as DRG elements move on motorcycles. Again, all we see, or all people see because they're only following one side, is the failed assaults. Well, how does the front line keep moving? They say by artillery or FPV, but at the same time, has come the process of ridicule has become our process. As was with the barn tanks, as was with anti-drone nets, cope cages, and now it's time to think effective or not. I can tell you who is making advancements on the battlefield and what tactics are they using. Maybe have a look over there. Okay, so yeah, and I've said I've been a large defender of the motorcycles because I'm infantry myself, and I see what would you rather do? Okay, you and your section. So let's call it 10 dudes. Would you rather load onto one fucking BMP and drive into the fucking line, or hey boys, we're all going to be on motorcycles and 10 of us are going to go on that operation? What is lower risk of mine, of FPV, of artillery, and faster movement, lower thermal signature, lower sound signature, all of that? Use your fucking heads. Now, let's have a look at the map. Here's Ukraine in the center of your screen, the capital of Kiev. The red areas occupies since 22, the purple since 2014, and the red check, of course, areas that Russia has made over the past 24 hours. So, let's move our way down onto the Velika Novosilka front line. Now, this would look less ridiculous if it just actually reported what is going on here, that this at the moment is likely how it looks and that this has come under control. But the defensive here is that now that they are then surrounded in here with an exit point of, can I measure? 1 kilometre. So again, we will see, but I think likely we'll see Zeleny Pole to Novosilka, but I think likely we'll see between Zeleny Pole and Novosilka fill in over the next 24 hours. So let's have a look on then the Suryak maps, and he shows basically this, that Zeleny Pole, Novopil, these areas are coming under control, movement out of here, but this sector in here that doesn't look like that according to himself. We can confirm where that movement then is. There's definitely movement there, but likely that has been closed up. Now let's continue our way into then the Pokrovsk eastern sector, where we have seen Russia making the most amount of ground. Remember, Baranivkia seems like only the other day, and that now we are 9 kilometers past there, but Baranivkia is also right in line with the, well, it's further than where it's horizontal, about there. So it is, say, 2.2 kilometers, say, past then Pokrovsk. They have then made at least, say, by that maths, 11 kilometers on the flank of Pokrovsk, and this is very dangerous, and we can see continuing to expand this. So Kalinove, this area being filled in, and Yelazativkia getting filled in as well today. So not only moving up, but then expanding that. You need to expand that to decrease the saturation of your enemy's artillery and drones, and increase things like your lines of communication, logistics, and all of that. So we can confirm that movement there, but there's much larger than this. Regardless of what you think of either side in this war, they don't do something for nothing, whether it is tactical goal, strategic gain, or optical gain as well. We can see Suryak here showing significantly more control in here today, that this area in here is getting filled in, as well as these areas all the way out to Zoroya as well. So Zoroya from Alexandropil, that all this sector in here has become enveloped and is moving right out on that, as well as further advancements up. See where this reservoir is, this reservoir from that road, all getting filled in. So we can see, and now we can confirm that Suryak was correct with this movement to Yelazativkia as well. A lot more movement on this line. But what does that mean? Well, it's doing a couple of things, and I think it's not one or the other. I believe that it is both of what Mr. Clement Molan was copping a lot of shit about on just having an opinion of actual assessment about Pokrovsk, and then areas like Drosivkia and Dobrilia as well. So let's have a look at this in a post that was the Russian armed forces started their first strategically important maneuver of 2025. So he goes a bit longer way to maneuver as important for the battle in the Donbass. It could be to continue north to Drosivkia, which I believe is this one right in here, unless I'm reading his writing slightly wrong. He's French, so the translation is not perfect, but continue to the north here and then envelop and develop then the western flank of Toretsk, eastern flank of Pokrovsk. So continue the way there. But he also says, after this progress, multiple hypotheses could happen. The most evident could be offensive from the high ground of Luzhika and Konstantinivka, forcing a large Ukrainian retreat from central Donbass and preparing for the Battle of Kramatorsk. Now, Kramatorsk sits in here, and it is in low ground, but is heavily, heavily fortified. It's the remaining most fortified, largest areas in the Donbass. So a movement out into here, and then expansion across now that Toretsk and Konstantinivka, Chasiv Yar, where Russia's pushing in Chasiv Yar, I'll show you in a minute, then all meets and becomes looking like he is shown here. And I'll just draw it really basically just like this sort of shape if you're following along. But I believe this is going to be twofold. He touches on another then chance here, but I think what we'll see will be both. Not only the push to the north, he says alternatively at the same time, to encircle Pokrovsk or by taking Dobropilya. So we see by this northern push, and also then go hard west to push toward Dobropilya to then envelop Pokrovsk, Minograd as well, which I think is highly likely. Well, I actually think we'll see both at the same time, that Russia will push on that front to try and get that up and fatten it and envelop on both the east and west at the same time. What about fortifications? We can still find approximately 2 lines of anti-tank ditches and multiple trenches. However, there's not enough. The western and northern Pokrovsk axis are more defended. So you can see where these are lying and where Russia is moving up here. But some of these, right up into here, have come under control. These are the, what are they called? The reservoirs that we were talking about. So like this reservoir in here, some of these are coming under control, and a lot of the area in here as well. But like I've said, that it doesn't matter if the fortification is there, it also matters how efficient and effective that fortification is. Russia will soon have to deal with larger fortifications, especially barbed wire and big ditches against infantry. Ukrainian engineering units are switching from large to small and more numerous trenches. So what I've said is what you want to do is you don't want, if a trench is made for you to attack north to south, you want to attack east to west. And the best way to do this is, let's have a look at, how do I turn on the defensive lines? Let's have a look on the defensive lines here. Once it'll come up, if it does, maybe not. So, oh my God, maybe it won't. My God. Well, anyway, I'll just draw these in. Say when the defensive lines were sitting like this of the Russian Surovikin line, what Ukraine was trying to do, let's just do them like this as an idea, was trying to push in like this to then head out to, say, the east, so then you're attacking on the side of these lines. A great example of this is go back and watch one of my videos when the Russian forces were in around Kurkov, is a lot of these lines in here were made for then a east to west attack, rather than when they came then north to south, and reduced the efficiency, effectiveness of those lines dramatically. Now, what other maps do we have to look at? I told you we'd look at Chasiv Yar, what will form the eastern flank of this area, or potentially even eventually the western flank of Kramatorsk if this was all to close up. This is an area where it looks like the Russians will be pushing hard. Let's bring up then the Suryak maps in here, and we have a look, Hirovkia, just above this area where then the reservoir is in here. This area is coming under control. Nothing major, but still movements in there. Then we'll come up into Seversk, and this is an area where there's said to be much larger changes, at least by Suryak. And again, Suryak maps, again, one mapper doesn't meet our threshold for confirmation, but the amount of times Suryak has been correct, and then a couple of days later we go, that's what he showed. Again, it's difficult not to be. So he talks about the battle here in Seversk. We've seen the line barely move, and Vokono-Mayansky in here, that he's saying the battle here is almost coming to an end, that the Russians are basically at the end of this. And you can see how dramatically different this looks to this map. This map isn't showing any movement. So let's go close enough to there to here. You're talking 5 kilometers. So wait out and see if there's any geolocations go up there. And if I miss it, please send it to me. You're more than welcome to reach out to me. And then we come up into then the Sumy front line. Once the Kursk front, but now Russia has crossed into Sumy and occupying, say, 91.6 plus this area, say 95 square kilometers, including some other little bits and pieces, moving towards Lochnia. And what I do say again and again is this will not be 10 kilometers of grey zone. There's definitely areas in here that are red. The map doesn't want to show it because of the kilometre squares at the end of the month. Since the beginning of the many May positional battles continued at this front, low intensity but new changes on the ground, Russian army took control over most of the localities, and all of it, of Lochnia, thus reaching the northern outskirts of Yanakivka. Yanakivka, this main supply route in here, very, very important. And of course, very important for then further movements in the direction of Sumy. Don't think the Russians have any real want to push across into here of the cost and the forests and this and that, but it does tie up a lot of Ukrainian forces. And Ukraine turned on the Kursk operation, and now that they can't turn off the Kursk operation, it is a thorn in the side. Legends, you have a wonderful day. I had way too much coffee today and I need to go take a piss. Look after yourself. I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.